When I quit my job at a local cheese factory in August of 2019, I had a plan. That plan was about as vague and naive as anyone who knew me at the time would probably expect. It was make games. I'd already spent a few years playing around with game engines such as GameMaker and Unity, so the idea was that I would leave behind my consistent 40 hours of steady wages a week and put nearly all my waking hours into game development. Not knowing a whole lot at the time about how to actually design anything worth playing, however, I fell back on what was familiar to me: storytelling. I got started as a solo dev by opening up Unity and building a short interactive fiction over a few days called Below. It's basically a brief fairy tale style fiction written with a poetic mode. I had just finished one of my most ambitious writing projects to date, a fairly beefy short story written entirely in poetry that took me over a year to finish. So it was a natural fit for me to lean back on that mode of writing to make my game development debut. For 2 years I wrote interactive stories, before I decided that I wanted to start making games that explored more of the possibilities of game design to communicate story. I had just finished playing through the original Deus Ex game, and after that demonstration of brilliant design ingenuity, my mind was abuzz with possibilities for experimenting with my own game mechanics. Around this time, the group of friends that I play tabletop role-playing games with and I were getting ready to begin a new campaign using the GURPS role-playing system, with myself as the game master. That basically just means that I'm in charge of coming up with the scenario that the players get to travel through within the game. What's unique about GURPS, however, is that while it's called a role-playing system, it's really more of a toolbox with which to create your own game. It shouldn't come as much of a surprise to anyone who's played my interactive stories, for which most of I have created every single element, from the coding to the design to the writing to the music. Actually, the music playing in the background of this video right now is a track I made for one of my interactive fiction games. That I would be attracted to the idea of a tabletop toolkit that let me build everything myself from scratch. So, I got to work on creating my own fictional world and its own fictional rules, while at the same time playing around with some of my video game ideas in Unity, until I landed on what has hitherto only been known as Project Orb. The first thing I realized working on Orb was just how fun it is to mess around with physics in a 3D space. I got a lot of positive responses for my prototype for Project Orb. People seemed to like the core mechanic of looking at objects to traverse the world, and were fans of the low poly art style. But unfortunately, after a few months, I hit a wall. Orb had a cool central mechanic, but I really struggled to figure out how to implement it in a way that could be turned into a full game. It was a rough decision after months of slogging away on something that I was quite fond of, but I decided after a few weeks of glacial progress and aimless work that I needed to move on. While these woes unfolded, the GURPS campaign with my friends was just about ready to begin. I had constructed the foundations of a huge fictional universe called Idaris, and a number of civilizations for that world that the players could choose from when building their characters. Just when I thought we were pretty much ready to get started, however, one of my players asked me if I could add mechanics into the game for giving him something like superpowers or magic or some special way that he could influence the world. I spent some time considering how I could add a feature like that without compromising the tone that I had established for Idaris, which, although it is certainly a world populated with mythology and strange creatures, had until this point been mostly subdued in the magic department. I eventually made good on his request by creating a new mechanic for the culture that his character comes from, the Musanai people, called battle poetry. The idea is that the Musanai are able to mix and match lines of poetry in order to elicit certain effects on the world around them. So, a poem using the lines, "My eyes behold, waters calm in pools of glass, tired in the winter glow," could be used to put someone to sleep, for example. However, though my world of Idaris flourished, I was still a game dev without a game. I spent some time drowning my sorrows in Slay the Spire, a deck-building roguelike that had ensnared my attention with its addictive gameplay loop, when it hit me. Why don't I just take the battle poetry mechanic that I made for my RPG players and turn that into a game. Feeling that Slay the Spire's combination of the roguelike and strategy genres was a great fit for what I had already created, I built myself a paper prototype to start workshopping a first draft of the game, and to my delight, it was fun. I went back to the world of Idaris that I had already been fleshing out for that RPG campaign and doubled down, writing history, poetry, even lyrics to music that I imagined the cultures of this world would create, with a core mechanic that I felt was strong, and a rich setting with plenty of lore to pull from for the game's narrative. I descended into the austere underbelly of Unity, and emerged after 2 months with a playable, working, and very much scalable, and that's how you know I really am a game dev, by the way, because I use buzzwords like scalable. Minimum viable product for Blossom. In a way, I wasn't only moving forward, I was also going back to the beginning. The first game I ever published was a brief demonstration of the art form that I've put more time and love into than any other. More than stories, more than music, even more than game development. Poetry was my first love, and after all these years, it's still coming through for me. That's where I am today with Blossom. I hope some of you will consider going on this journey with me, because if there's one thing I've learned from nearly 3 years as a lone wolf dev, it's that going solo is always better with company. See you next time.